This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by
the Committee to elect Chris Chyung, State Representative. The Bill and Kelly Show is recorded at Studio A at Executive Suite Squared in beautiful Hammond, Indiana. Now, here's Bill and Kelly. Hello, welcome to the Bill and Kelly Show. With us today, we're honored to have Chris Chyung, who is the representative for District 15 in the state of Indiana. Welcome to our show, and this is your second time on the show, and we're so honored to have you back again. Kelly sends her apologies for not being here. I got to tell you, you're one of her favorite guests, so she...
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that.
She sends her love, and you're one of mine, too. We had a good time at Sip Coffee House when we had you on first time. So, we're here to talk about what you've done as a state rep, but first of all, what a lot of people are maybe new to District 15 that maybe moved over from Illinois or maybe moved from out of state. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to run for state rep in your area?
Absolutely. Well, I'm currently the state representative for House District 15, which is Dyer, Cherville, part of St. John, part of Griffith. I was born and raised in Northwest Indiana. I was born in Maryville, went to Munster High School, and now I live in Dyer and I work in real estate when I'm not in the legislature. And really what I wanted to see as a then 24, 25-year-old who came back after going to college away in New York City and then came back to Northwest Indiana to start my career, I wanted to see more young people have the opportunities to raise families, to start businesses, to buy homes in Northwest Indiana. And if you look at the data, my district doesn't have very many young folks. We have more elderly people than the rest of Indiana, and we don't have the amenities that attract young people, that retain that growth and economic development, and that will position us for the future. So I decided to do something about it and ran for office for the first time in 2018 and squeaked it out by 82 votes out of 25,000. So don't let anyone tell you that your vote doesn't count, because there are tons of local, county, town, city, state legislative elections where the margins of error are a difference maker by just a few dozen votes.
And not that I'm trying to harp on this, but can you tell us how old you are again?
Right now I'm 27. So it's been 2 years since I ran, and what I really want to see done in the legislature is to make a more balanced perspective of what Indiana needs to be moving into the future. We've got really rough challenges ahead of us. We have to be honest with ourselves. With the economic downturn, with the coronavirus pandemic, and it doesn't really feel like there's an end in sight. We started this pandemic really kind of picked up in March, right when we adjourned, and we're already nearing November, still feeling like we don't have a solution in terms of government leadership. So what we need to do at the state level is make sure that our budget is positioned to help the people who need it most, whether it's people, small businesses, ordinary working folks, not just the big corporations, the big-time political donors. They're going to be okay for the most part. Let's be honest with ourselves. We got to make sure that we're focusing on our workforce and focusing on those families who have been hit hardest by this thing. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to sacrifice a generation of progress moving forward.
And we're going to get back to that a little bit later in the show. What we'd like to start out talking about is your first session, which a lot of people refer to it as freshman year. Some call it hazing at its best, and some at its worst. This is your orientation term. I mean, no qualms about it. On top of that, the reason why I asked your age, not that I'm trying to be discriminatory with age because I'm a grandpa, but really, I mean, it's got to be tough. I mean, you're looking at people that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years older than you, and to get those. So let's talk about your first term that you finished up here, and talk to us about what you as a whole body, as the House, what were you able to do? Some of the things that you worked on specifically, and the House in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, bipartisanship is key in Indiana. You've got to work to build those relationships across the aisle, whether you're Republican or Democrat, to make sure that when you're talking to your colleagues and you're in a body of 99 other people in the Indiana House of Representatives, if you don't have that cross-partisan support, you're not going to get anything done. So the challenge, being a freshman legislator from a swing district and also being a top target for the opposition party this election cycle, the challenge is always to try and build those bridges in a way that they don't want to give you too much credit because they want to beat you in the next election cycle. So what we did going into the office was to make sure that we got on the committees and scheduled meetings with our chairman right away. Our chairman from the opposition party, we made sure to know everything about there is to know to them, get to know what their hobbies are, what their families are like, get them to know who I am. If for some of them it was kind of the first time that they'd even really had to work with a person of Asian descent and yet let alone a young millennial like myself, so it was kind of a culture shock there. But when you're talking to these folks, there is so much more in common that we have as Hoosiers, as Americans, as people of faith that we have together than what drives us apart, and that's what you hear in politics, at the national level way too much. So one thing I was really proud of that we could pass was some important legislation to tighten school bus safety in the state of Indiana. In Northeast Indiana, there was a devastating tragedy before the 2018 election where 3 kids were killed because a woman went around the school bus stop arm. One of the bills I had authored in the first session was to increase the penalty on that to disincentivize people from going around the school bus stop arm, because there was basically no teeth to the law. The police officers couldn't really do very much if you were going around the stop arm. So we worked in a bipartisan way to put my bill into another omnibus school bus safety bill, and we got that passed. And knock on wood, there haven't been any more tragedies with young kids getting hit while they're getting off the school bus lately. There's been more of a talk to get cameras around the buses so that they can see the license plates of people who do go around. And it's simple bipartisan stuff like that you don't read about in the papers because it's not that inflammatory. It's not that much of a conflict that sells newspapers and sells in the mainstream media. But here we were able to come together in a really common sense bipartisan way. And there's tons of other things we've done on the Financial Institutions Committee, where I sit also to make sure that we are saving Hoosiers $150 million in interest payments for these small loans. You might have heard of these short-term payday or predatory loan sharking loans, where it's like you take out a $400 loan and then most of the time people who are in really desperate financial straits owe $2,000 on a $400 loan, and they're completely upside down. And by killing some legislation, again, in a really bipartisan way, we were able to save Hoosiers. An estimated nonpartisan estimate was around $150 million in interest payments.
Now, what makes that fascinating, and thank you for bringing that up, and I want to come back to the bus safety issue, because as a grandparent, that was huge. That was huge for me. Knowing that these people are going to be held accountable for doing something absolutely thoughtless. The arm is out. What makes you think that's safe? So thank you for that. Now, one thing that I find kind of interesting, and you see them all over the place, these payday loan, or I call them loan sharks. Basically, that's what they are. Now, one thing that people don't realize, they hold some lobbying power down at the state level, and that's something other that you've had to challenge on. So how were you able to overcome that, their lobbying power, because you're having to work with opposition or some people from your own party that maybe has some big contributions from these folks?
Exactly, you hit the nail on the head, Bill. I mean, if you haven't gone to the State House yet to see how the sausage is made and to talk with your legislator, ask them to meet one-on-one with you. Ask them to, go through their campaign finance contributions, because I'm sure there will be a lot there that shocks you, and it, in some cases, disappoints you. You are absolutely right. The fact of the matter is that these big institutions, they pool together giant checks to certain legislators in tough districts to try and swing legislation in their favor. The system incentivizes them to be bad actors because they're rewarded with legislation that is tilted against the consumer and for the industry. So one commitment I've made to this office is that we don't accept any corporate PAC or corporate donations. We, focus on union labor and as well as our grassroots donors online. I get like $5 donations from here and there all over the place, and we try to make our own office accountable to not just the big industries that we're supposed to be regulating, quite honestly, but the people who are going to be harmed the most by some of these policies. Those people who are going towards these desperate loan products of 391% interest rates and these obscene rates, they are in the most desperate straits of their lives. The least the government and the elected officials can do is help them not be taken advantage of. It's not, we don't need to launch a new program to wipe out their debts, but let's just protect them from these bad actors, and the campaign contributions, like you said, are a big part of it.
Right. Now, I'm kind of glad you brought that up because you talk about people in desperate times. Another category of people, because of the pandemic, and I talk about these people because I feel for them, and basically because in a past life I was part of the mechanism which tried to save labor costs, and the way we did that is approach employees, usually minimum wage employees, quite frankly, or $9 to $10 an hour employees, and said, look, we want to keep your job, so in order to do that, we're going to move you over to a independent contractor state. Now, and a lot of people refer to this as 1099. That's the form that they get paid by, if you will, but they no longer have benefits. They get paid a lump of sum, and no health, no unemployment insurance, which is going to be key in this discussion. So comes along the pandemic, and the CARE Act was created, and for those of you who are familiar with that, one of the things that it was supposed to do is assure that the states pay these people, the 1099 independent contractors, unemployment insurance. Now, with every state, Illinois had this problem, Indiana did, I think just about every state, because the system wasn't designed to pay unemployment to someone who didn't pay into the program, they had to literally redesign their systems. So talk about your advocacy for these people. What have you done to help them out? Because there's still quite a few of them, and the shame is they don't know of someone like you to go to and say, look, I'm having to borrow from my uncle so I can just get food.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, Bill. I mean, this economic travesty is ravaging through everyone, whether it's full-time or whether it's part-time. You've got gig economy workers, a bigger sector than ever, with people driving for Uber or doing DoorDash or taking on these freelance gigs. With the CARES Act money that was appropriated to Indiana, we were able to speed up, my office was able to speed up a lot of unemployment claims for these folks who came to me on the verge of, dozens of them came to me on the verge of tears, calling my office saying, I've never had to file for unemployment in my life. I've never had to, I'm a hard worker. I'm not like one of those people. And it was just like, sir or ma'am, you don't need to, justify this pandemic has put tens of millions of Americans out of work. What we're here to do is get you the benefits that the state promised you and get them to you quickly so that the bureaucracy isn't standing in your way of getting those benefits you deserve. And that's what we were able to do. It takes a call to my office, and for those of you who probably have had to deal with me dealing with the Department of Workforce Development who administers this program, it does take some time for sure, but us consistently leaning, my office, my staff, consistently leaning on the DWD to speed up those claims and say, Joe or Mary, she hasn't been paid for 2 months for the benefit she deserves. She's about to lose her home. She's about to be evicted. And chopping up that social safety net, making retirement security more out of reach than ever for people is something that we're absolutely going to address in the upcoming session, and making sure that those unemployment benefits get out to people quickly so that bureaucracy is not in the way.
And thank goodness that we have organizations like the Food Bank to help support these people in these times, because they're still out there. So if you live in District 15 and are struggling getting your unemployment,
call me.
There you go. And now what is almost entwined with that is health care. Now this crosses some federal levels, which we should be talking to, some congressmen and states, senators, or rather U.S. senators with this regard. One of the things that we're running into, and again, we are dealing with people that now have no income. They lost their insurance because they were laid off. Now, one will debate that there's enough competition with healthcare out there to supply healthcare to these people who literally have no income whatsoever at this point. What do you have to say about how the state can step forward to help some of these people with healthcare, whether it's just educating them that they can go into a medical facility and get some things taken care of that they've delayed because of this crisis?
Yeah, Medicaid coverage is key here, and I've spoken with the healthcare operators who are getting such low reimbursables for Medicaid that they're not able to even pay the bills. There's been a massive consolidation in the medical supplier as well as EMT and ambulatory services sector because the big private equity companies are trying to come in, buy up all the region, and then deliver worse care at a higher price. So what we've got to do is make sure that not only is government funding Medicaid towards a competitive level where you don't have to wait hours for, if you live in a rural area in Indiana, for ambulatory care to arrive at your doorstep, but also make sure that there is real transparency when it comes to healthcare pricing. This was something I authored a bill regarding prescription drug prices, and it was one of those, again, that got folded into a bigger bill, so I didn't care that my name was at the top of the authorship or sponsorship list. I really do not care one way or the other. As long as it gets passed into law, I don't need the credit at all. So we were able to slip that into a different bill and bring the stakeholders together in a discussion about how we can lower prescription drug prices. The pharmaceutical industry, the insurance industry, the healthcare consumers, big employers, all of us came together and have just begun those discussions. And not only that, I don't take donations from the pharmaceutical or insurance industry. So there are quite a few legislators who do from both sides of the aisle, quite honestly. I don't think that's good for democracy. It's my personal belief that we have to make sure, again, we're accountable to healthcare consumers first. It's not like I won't listen to the industry if they have a viewpoint that they want to tell me about. But really it's about putting people first when we're talking about healthcare coverage, especially in this pandemic. So I'm proud of the work that we've gotten done, but it's not enough by any stretch of the imagination. We've got to make sure that our most vulnerable are taken care of.
All right. And there's one other issue I'd like to cover with you before we ask you about what your beliefs are and your values are. One thing that particularly in Porter County and in Lake County and LaPorte County, this region has suffered, obviously, the pandemic, but the pandemic has also almost created a cover over another growing problem that still has not stopped. And actually, as far as death rates are concerned, are outweighing anything that the pandemic has done to us, and that is substance abuse and drug overdose deaths. What can you tell us at the state level is being done, or even by your office, to help these local counties and municipalities to deal with this growing problem? And we're dealing with an alarming number of people besides the pandemic arriving with drug overdose deaths.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about that? What is being done at the state level?
Yeah, well, again, I want to see a lot more done, but in our own little sphere for our office, we connect folks, our constituents who have these issues or know of somebody in their family who has these issues, to local resources, whether it's 211 or substance abuse programs that we know locally. We can refer them one-on-one. That's kind of the bottom floor level of connections that our office is trying to make in the district, and just let people know that those resources are even available. At the higher levels, we want to make sure that the drug companies are held accountable for some of the actions, whether it's the opioid crisis. I do agree with some of the attorney generals across the country are launching lawsuits against the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma for the things they knew about the opioid crisis, the documentation and the research that was shown to them before that drug was manufactured, that it would be extremely addictive, very dangerous, would wreck rural America, would wreck lives of countless families across the country, and they decided to go through and go ahead and push that through. So again, it comes back to the fact that we need this accountability in politics. We have to get rid of this pay to play, essentially, when it comes to the donations, when it comes to the campaign contributions. I really kind of do believe that it is factor that the pharma industry is such a big donor in the legislative races in Indiana that stops progress in so many ways. That stops legislators from wanting them to hold accountable because the industry is coming in and buying out all of their television ads, and that's legal in Indiana, which is also kind of crazy. So we have to have reform from the top down, and as soon as we defeat this pandemic also, I think that we'll see more people, fewer deaths of despair, because with the lockdowns, with the fraying of social connections, with the fraying of connections to your faith institutions and your family institutions and your friend network, your social network, that is also contributing to these deaths of despair as well.
And you so eloquently saying such is that, besides the problem that existed, that problem has gotten worse because disparity. Losing your job now, you're looking for a way of isolating yourself psychologically from the experiences, the hard, cold experiences. So now the other thing is too, and I'm kind of negligent this because I haven't kept up on it. There at one time was a software, there were tracking software that doctors were supposed to use, and that kind of they got the software, but the issue was that the pushback was from the doctors was this is going to take too much time, and I think they were going to, and this is where you've got to excuse me because I'm not knowledgeable, I haven't kept up with this, but then they were going to talk to the pharmaceutical, the drugstores to see if they can be. Is that annulled, or is that still in existence?
So there are a few different databases that are floating around. At the federal level, there is a Medicare payer claims database where you can go to the federal government's website, I think it's cms.gov, type in the name of your doctor or any facility in your area and see how much they get reimbursed for Medicare and what they're paying for. So that does exist now. What I think Indiana has been trying to do as of late is establish an all-payer claims database in which all healthcare that is being delivered would be completely transparent as to what people are paying for, because you'd be shocked if you look at the studies between what someone at a hospital in Lake County versus what someone at a hospital in Porter County would pay for the exact same procedure. There are massive disparities across Indiana, and it seems like the hospital industry is kind of just pulling numbers out of a hat at times when you have these disparities. It's like, no, it should be related to the cost. You shouldn't be able to, just because you can charge someone $150,000 for a hip replacement doesn't mean you should, and doesn't mean you should be allowed to. So we've got to establish some transparent guardrails around this. Again, we got shot down in the last session, and it wasn't a partisan vote, quite honestly. There were some Republicans and Democrats mixing on yes or no lines, and I was disappointed that we weren't able to pass something that was more transparent, but I'll be excited to come back next year and fight for that again.
Right. I know the one I was thinking about specifically is the one that would track to see, that would allow a physician or a pharmacist to say, oh, this person is being prescribed an opiate or something could...
I think that exists, yeah.
Okay.
I think it does. I would have to ask my mom because she's an allergist, and I think she goes through that system. And she, there's occasionally patients who come into the office asking for opioids, and they're clearly addicted, and she refers them to get treatment for addiction elsewhere, as they should. But yeah, we want more transparency around that too.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about you more, about your value system, about what you feel is going to be to say to the folks in District 15 that are going to be voting for you if they haven't already. What are your value systems? What do you believe is your selling point to be there to continue on as their representative?
I think one of the things I'm most proud of with this office is the level of transparency that we've brought to this office in so many different ways, whether it's the 24 town halls that I've had. I let people I'm excited as a legislator to meet my constituents face to face. I like the tough questions. I did high school debate and I was pretty good at it, not to toot my own horn, but I did like to be able to see that opposing viewpoint, find some common middle ground with people, get some common sense solutions on the table, and then eventually pass some of those into law. So that's something that was especially heartening. I mean, we were able to solve so many constituents' problems. If they had even a question like, is it legal for me to do X, Y, or Z? Or I heard from a friend that Illinois is like this, but Indiana's like this, and we would just be basically the hub for them to come in and just ask us any questions they need. Additionally, I give out my cell phone number to every single one of my constituents on all of my mailers. You can call me or text me if you have any questions about anything. I've gotten challenges about U.S. Senate related matters, and I have to remind people, I'm not in the U.S. Senate, I'm in your Indiana State
I remember
House.
you tweeting about that.
Yeah.
I'm like, seriously? Someone thought that was a local state?
Whatever. I think everybody kind of ropes government into one big ball and just tries to not really distinguish. But at any rate, we are very proud of the fact that we have that level of connectivity to our constituents that is on an unprecedented level, quite honestly. I've had more legislative town halls than any other legislator, Democrat or Republican, quite honestly, and that's something I really enjoy doing it. So partly that's one reason I have so many. And I want to be able to be that voice in the legislature for another 2 years. We've just had 2 under our belt, and now we're excited to introduce new priorities like veterans housing, an issue that I'm really passionate about. And I've met with the Northwest Indiana Veterans Village, and we've seen that some of these veterans are being discriminated against just because they're on a housing voucher, even though they can pay the full market rent, even though they have a great credit, they have no criminal background history. That our veterans are hurting right now, and that legislation I'm really excited to unveil in the next few weeks.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that's one point in this show that we've always been an advocate, and it is a crying shame that we have homeless veterans, we have veterans who are being backlogged in the VA system, and that should never be. I think that just about does it. We want to thank you again for being on our show, and thank you for sponsoring the Bill and Kelly Show. That is so helpful, especially during these times. And we wish you luck during your campaign. And is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we say goodbye?
Well, I wanted to thank you as well, Bill, for hosting this show and for providing our Northwest Indiana listeners another media outlet. And if my constituents need to get in touch with me, my number is 219-654-2554. Don't forget to get out and vote. Early voting is open now. Skip the lines on Election Day. Even though Election Day is November 3rd, you can vote now. So make sure whoever you're voting for, you make sure your constitutional right is heard.
Great. Well, thank you again for being on our show, and for all of you who have tuned in and listened today, we hope this has been very helpful for you to find out a little bit more about Chris and what his values are and how he can serve you again in the next term. So with that, we'll say goodbye for now.
This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by
The Committee to Elect Chris Chyung, State Representative.